So recently Dana White made a shocking update about the UFC ranking which could ruin the careers of many fighters and also destroy the sport of mixed martial arts as we know it. First we'll listen to Dana White's comments and then we'll look at the craziness that is currently happening in the UFC rankings. So recently a video was came out of Dana White reacting to the UFC rankings update following UFC 307, and in the video Dana White is pissed off because Khalil Rountree wasn't moved up in the rankings despite losing to Alex Pereira at UFC 307. So first we'll listen to Dana White's comments about this ranking update and then I'll give you my thoughts on the situation.
All right, here we go. I know it's reversed, can't see it on here, but the moron strike again. Khalil Rountree fights that badass fight against Pereira, and the morons rank him number 8. Keep him at number 8. Literally this week, I have a meeting to try to fix the rankings and get all these know-nothing, do-nothing motherfuckers out of it. So, hopefully this week I get this fixed. Have a great day, everybody.
So let me give my reaction to this situation. Dana says he thinks that Khalil Rountree should move up in the rankings despite losing to Alex Pereira. Now, in my opinion, I don't think he should move up at all. I think Khalil Rountree doesn't deserve to be ranked higher than number 8, and actually, it deserves to drop down in the rankings. Now, taking into consideration that before this fight, Khalil Rountree was already ranked number 8, in my opinion, he shouldn't have been given a title shot in the first place, and the UFC actually screwed Magomed Ankalaev, who is, in my opinion, the number 1 contender, and he should have been fighting Alex Pereira for the title. Obviously, Magomed Ankalaev is fighting Alexander Rakic, but he is ranked number 2, and the UFC is forcing him to fight down to fight the number 5, but they let Khalil Rountree fight up to fight Alex Pereira for the title, which is absolute BS. And again, this is just pure hypocrisy from Dana White complaining about the rankings when it suits him, but in reality, Dana White and the UFC matchmakers manipulate the rankings to their own advantage, and they don't give a shit about the ranking system. They only care about it when it benefits their business. So just to let you know guys, I recently launched a YouTube mentorship called YouTube 10X, where I teach creators how to 10X their views and revenue on YouTube. Recently I helped all of these creators get monetized on YouTube. I also helped this creator reach 75,000 subscribers in 2 months. If you're interested in joining YouTube 10X, I'll leave a link in the description of this video. And talking of the hypocrisy of Dana White and the UFC, I'm going to show you a few examples in a second, but first I want to show you another interview with Dana White and Kevin Iole where Dana White complains about the UFC rankings, and he actually says that the UFC is working on some kind of system that will use AI to dictate the UFC rankings. Now, if they use AI, this could actually be detrimental to the UFC rankings. It could ruin a lot of fighters' careers and it could actually destroy the entire sport. I'll give you my thoughts on that in a second, but first let's just listen to what Dana White had to say to Kevin Iole.
And you know, you mentioned breaking into the top 10 or top 5, and that brings up Moicano because, of course, you know, he's been pretty loud on social media about the rankings, the new UFC rankings. You know, he's number 11 right now. Did not move up after that performance. How does that get you?
Let's get into this. Khamzat Chimaev is number 12. Okay, Max Holloway is number 10. The guy he knocked out is number 3. So I got to find some media guys that know the fight sport, that understand the sport of fighting, that are actually doing the rankings. So the rankings are definitely a problem. Moicano, I agree with you 100%. But don't worry, my friend. AI will be here soon, and this will all be fixed. We get all these bums that know nothing about fighting out of this shit and get AI in here, and we can fix all these rankings. I could go through this board for a fucking hour with you about the rankings and the MMA media.
And
Now, obviously, again, Dana White saying that he is pissed off at the UFC ranking system because the media dictate the rankings and he wants to have more control over the rankings. The reality of the situation here is Dana White is super pissed because him and the matchmakers can't make some of the matches that they want to make. They are in this business to make money. The rankings don't really mean shit to the UFC. Their primary goal is to get as many views, as many pay-per-view sales as possible, and make the biggest fights to get the biggest eyeballs. And sometimes the rankings get in the way of this, and this is what Dana White doesn't like. He doesn't like third-party people dictating the rankings because it affects his business and he can't make the fights he wants to make. And this is the real reason why Dana White is pissed off at the UFC rankings. But a comment that he actually made about UFC using AI to dictate the UFC rankings, this could actually destroy a lot of fighters' careers and it could ruin the sport, because just imagine if you have an AI software dictating the rankings, who is programming that AI and what criteria is that AI using to dictate the UFC rankings? Because if you can learn anything from the past about Dana White and the UFC matchmakers, a lot of titles fights that are made, they're not based on rankings, they're based on popularity, how many views a fighter gets on YouTube, how many followers they have on social media, how much attention they get online. And if the UFC has anything to do with it, just imagine if this AI software decided to favor fighters in the UFC rankings based on social media popularity, based on views on YouTube. The rankings will be absolutely screwed, and we'll be having fighters that don't deserve to be in the rankings moving up to the top 5 and getting title shots, etc. And we'd have some of the best fighters who don't necessarily have a big following on social media getting pushed down the rankings, getting screwed out of title shots and being screwed out of their ranking position. So for me, using AI to dictate the UFC rankings is very dangerous. It could ruin a lot of fighters' careers, and this is super suspicious because Dana White and the UFC should not have an impact on the UFC rankings. All sports, if it's the NFL, the NBA, boxing in particular, they have external third parties that dictate the rankings and decide who is ranked where. And this is how all sports should be controlled, because if you have a promotion and you dictate the rankings, you're going to dictate the rankings based on personal interests, which are nothing to do with the sport and fairness and rankings of the sport. You're going to be doing it based on business and numbers and financial gain, which is why the UFC should have absolutely nothing to do with the rankings, and it should be done by an external third party. But anyway, I just want to show you some more examples of Dana White's ranking hypocrisy, guys. But just before I get into this, I want to say that I do respect Dana White. I look up to Dana White in terms of his business and his accolades that he's achieved with the sport of mixed martial arts, but some of the things he says and does is absolute nonsense, and Dana openly gaslights fighters and the media on a regular basis, which I'm going to show you with a few examples here. So the first example of Dana White's hypocrisy with the rankings is Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Now, this is a complete farce on so many different levels. First of all, Tom Aspinall is the current interim champion, and he has defended the interim title after winning it already. So by rights, Tom Aspinall should have been fighting Jon Jones for the title next. Despite Tom Aspinall being the interim champion, the UFC and Dana White has been adamant that Jon Jones will fight Stipe Miocic. Now, let me just add that Stipe has not fought in almost 4 years now. He got brutally knocked out in his last fight. He's ranked number 8. There's a ton of fighters above Stipe in the rankings who have been way more active, putting in more work, and way more deserving of a title shot. And you could literally pick any of these in the top 10 of the rankings who deserve a title shot more than Stipe Miocic. And this is a perfect example of Dana White and the UFC matches not giving a shit about the UFC rankings. They only stick to the UFC rankings when it suits them. Another example is the title fight between Alexandre Pantoja and Steve Erceg at UFC 301. Now, when I saw the announcement of this fight, my eyeballs nearly popped out of my head for 3 different reasons. Number 1, I never heard of Steve Erceg before this title fight was announced. Number 2, he was ranked number 10 in the division. And number 3, he only had 3 fights in the UFC and was given a title shot. And at the time, this title fight made absolutely no sense, because at the time there was way more deserving fighters in the division that deserved a title shot. Mohamed Bakayev, Kai Kara France, Amir Albazi, Brandon Moreno, even Brandon Royval deserved a title shot at this point. But despite this, the UFC gave a title shot to the number 10th ranked contender, Steve Erceg, which makes absolutely no sense. I don't understand how a fighter that is ranked number 10 can be given a title shot, make $500,000 to $1 million to compete for a title, despite only having 3 fights in the UFC, with fighters above him way more deserving of a title shot. Again, this is another example of the UFC's lack of regard for the UFC rankings, and again, they don't give a shit about the rankings, and they only look at the rankings when it benefits them. The final example, now a lot of people may disagree with this, but Khamzat Chimaev fighting Robert Whittaker at UFC 308. Now, if we look at Khamzat Chimaev's run in the middleweight division, it has not been the best. His first fight at middleweight was actually by accident because he should have been fighting Nate Diaz at welterweight, but he missed weight. So because he missed weight, the UFC put him against Kevin Holland instead. So his first fight at middleweight was actually by accident. Hamzat's second fight at middleweight was against Kamaru Usman, who technically was not a middleweight. He's on a 2-fight losing streak, and that was a good performance from Hamzat, but still. So basically Hamzat missed weight and then fought a welterweight, and now he's fighting the number 1 contender, Robert Whittaker, despite being ranked number 12 in the division. Now, in this recent interview when Dana White was talking about Khamzat Chimaev being ranked number 12 and he deserves to be ranked higher, in my opinion, Khamzat Chimaev doesn't deserve to be fighting Robert Whittaker, because if you look at this from, again, a rankings perspective, Khamzat is ranked number 12, Whittaker is ranked number 3. Whittaker's been way more active in the middleweight division. Khamzat has only fought once at middleweight. He fought once there by accident, and his second opponent was a welterweight, so it doesn't really class as a real middleweight fight in my opinion. But Hamzat is ranked number 12. If he wins this fight against Robert Whittaker, he gets an immediate title shot against Dricus du Plessis, which again, this blows my mind. Obviously, Hamzat is a star, is very talented, but how can he leapfrog and bypass all of these fighters that are on a tear right now, like Brendan Allen, Ko Baralio, Nasruddin Imavov? Even Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland are more deserving of a middleweight title shot before Khamzat Chimaev, in my opinion. So if Hamzat beats Robert Whittaker, he's going to leapfrog straight to the title, which in my opinion makes absolutely no sense. But again, the UFC completely disregarding the rankings, and they only use the rankings to their own benefit, and they don't really give a shit about fairness and morals. They only give a shit about the UFC rankings when it benefits them, and this is the reason why the UFC wants to get rid of the current ranking system, use their own media members, or use AI to dictate the UFC rankings. The fact is, Dana White and the UFC just want more control over the rankings so they can make the fights that they want. Dana says Hamzat doesn't deserve to be ranked number 12. Well, where does he deserve to be ranked then? Because he's only fought once at middleweight, fought a welterweight, so how does he deserve to be ranked higher than number 12? As I say, I do respect Dana White, but some of the stuff that he comes out with is absolute nonsense, and he constantly gaslights the fighters and media members on a regular basis, and I think this is absolute corruption on a deeper level. If the UFC has an influence over the rankings, or they use AI to dictate the rankings, this is going to completely destroy a lot of fighters' careers, and it's going to destroy the sport as a whole. There's going to be a lot of title fights that don't make sense. There's going to be fighters coming into the UFC getting immediate title shots, fighters that are on win streaks with legitimate win streaks getting screwed out of title shots. But give me your thoughts in the comments, guys, and give me your thoughts on this situation. Do you think Dana White and the UFC should have more influence over the rankings? Do you think AI should be used to dictate the UFC rankings? Give me your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you think.